everyone, welcome, I'm Izzy at Minerva. Today we're looking at how to create an opening to our bodice front, and that is the opening of the double-breasted front opening. So we're going to have buttons on either side, as you can see in the little image next to me. This is a great little detail to add to any of the other video series that we've already filmed. So you can add this to your various collars that we've drafted, various different shapes of where you've rotated your darts to, so you can really sort of start to piece together your own bespoke top. So let's just get straight on into it. As usual, you're going to need the following pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me here. And we're just going to use our standard bodice block for this. So go and grab some tracing paper, trace over your bodice block, and then come and join me and I'll talk you through it step by step. So on the screen in front of you, we've got our standard body block with our dart at our shoulder and another one at the waist to create some nice shaping. Then grab another piece of paper and just pop that underneath. So basically we're going to create two lines of buttons on either side of the centre front. So to start off with, we're just going to draw two lines to either side of the centre front, which are the same distance from the centre front, and they're just going to act as our marker point for where our button lines need to go. Obviously, as always, you can change where you want these to be and the distance that you want. I'm just going to do 4 centimetres just to show the sort of the drama of the shape change. So I'm going to mark a point 4 centimetres to either side of the centre front line. We're then just going to draw in the button stand to the line that the furthest line that we've just drawn, and for me I'm just going to do that at 1.5 centimetres. That just creates a point at which the buttons can be located there and sort of overlap nicely, and then just square off that top. At this point we're going to draw in the neckline, so again you can choose if you want a square neckline or a curved neckline. Whatever type of neckline you want, you can create at this point. I think I'm going to create a nice softly curved rectangle effectively. So let's see how that looks. I'm just going to mark a point along the front where the apex of the bust is at that point. I want my neckline to be about 5 centimetres higher than that, so I'm going to draw that point there. You could have a nice big soft curve all the way across here. I think for me, I'm just going to draw a nice straight line 5 centimetres above the apex as a bit of a marker, like that. And then we're going to find like a nice soft curve to take that up. Okay, so that's our nice neat neckline at that point. Now I can see that this is going to get a bit tricky up here, isn't it? So I think I'm actually just going to rotate that dart around to the bottom down there. If you're not sure how to rotate the dart down to the side seam, you can just refer back to video 42. Draw a line from the apex to the side seam. Cut out the volume of the neck dart. Remove that volume and just rotate that pattern piece around. The reason why I'm doing this is because I think that the neckline is going to be a little bit vulnerable. If we just leave that dart there, it might look a bit bulky as well, so I'm not so keen on that. So we're rotating that dart around to that point there. Find the centre of the dart, and then mark a point 2 centimetres away from the apex along the centre line of the dart, and draw in your new dart legs. At this point, I'm going to suggest that we actually cut out the neckline and the button stand so that we can see what's going on a little bit more clearly. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to add our buttonholes. So I'm going to use this expanding gauge, as usual in this series, so that I can get a nice equal distance between all the buttons. So on our pattern, we've got one line of buttons that we want here and another line of buttons here along these 2 dotted lines. We want a button definitely across the centre of our bust, which is going to be at the apex there. And we're going to try and make sure that at least one of them is lining up with the apex or there and thereabouts. I'm going to add 5 little buttons in here. Grab your pattern drafting ruler and then I'm lining up my little dots there so that I can just mark a point where the buttonhole needs to go across the other side as well. So we've got the buttonholes on both sides of the pattern piece. So we've got buttonholes on both button stands. Excellent. The only thing we need to do now is just to add our facing, which I'm going to do in a nice green pen on our block so that we can see that when we add our seam allowances in a few minutes. Okay, so as usual, we are just going to add a 5 centimetre facing, so just kind of mark a point offset from the neckline, just 5 centimetres long. And then again, we basically just sort of want it to curve down, so it's at least 1.5 centimetres away from this button stand at this point. Use your pattern drafting ruler just to find a nice curve. I'm just going to annotate that with the word facing. Okay, let's trace over our pattern piece now, adding our seam allowances as we go. I'm going to trace over the main pattern piece to start off with. So just do your standard of adding your seam allowance to your shoulder seams. We're not adding sleeves, so just draw in your armscye, seam allowance to the side seam. Just draw in your waistline, add the shaping of the waist dart. Add your seam allowance to the side over here. And then we're also going to add a seam allowance around the neckline so that it can attach to the facing. Draw in where your button holes are going to go. And because we only need one pattern piece for this, we're just going to annotate where our buttons are going to go. And when we cut out the pattern piece, we'll annotate the correct side of the buttonholes and the buttons. I'd also recommend that we just add some notches for where we want for the button stands, just so we're really clear on that. That will help us to join up together. And you can also add a notch for the centre front as well. Grain line follows the centre front as usual. Double-breasted button front, front to bodice, cut 2. Great, grab your tracing paper and just shift it along so we can now trace off the facing. Draw in your shoulder seam with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, your neckline again with a seam allowance, and the edge of the pattern piece with a seam allowance. The waistline has no seam allowance, and then just follow the facing line all the way down. You could add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance and sort of aim to tuck this facing under if you wanted to, or you could finish it with a serger or overlocker. Both those options are available. For the purpose of this video, I'm assuming we're just going to overlock it. Add your grain line and then just add your notches. Double-breasted button front, front facing, cut 2. Great, cut those pattern pieces out and then we'll go and look at the back pattern piece, which is really simple and something that you've done loads of times if you've been following this series. Add your 5 centimetre facing line around the back of the neck and then just draw that in. We'll draw in our facing to start off with. Add a seam allowance to the shoulder seam and then add a seam allowance around the neckline. Draw in the bottom curve of the facing, follow the line of the centre back. Annotate your pattern piece. Place on fold. This is our back facing and we're just going to cut one on the fold. Draw in the back bodice now. Follow the line of the centre back. Again, add your seam allowance to the neckline. Draw in your shoulder seam. Draw in the armscye. Add your seam allowance to the side seam. And then just draw in your waistline. Annotate your pattern piece. Place on fold. This is our back bodice. We're going to cut one on the fold. Now, as an extra precaution, you can also add your grain line to both the facing and to your main pattern piece. Sometimes people don't do that because they assume that if you're cutting it on the fold, it's obvious that it's going to be on the grain line. But for new beginner sewists, it's not always that obvious, is it? Brilliant. Okay, cut those pattern pieces out now and then out of calico. We're going to start off by just preparing our darts across all of our pattern pieces. If you're not sure how to do that, refer to video 22, where I taught you how to do that in a lot of detail. For these pattern pieces, we've got 2 on the back as usual, and also 2 on the front. Once you've sewn the darts for the front, you can press the side one down and the waist one across to the side, so down and across for both of them. And likewise with the back pattern pieces, as usual, press them towards the side. Next, we're going to attach our shoulder seams of our back and our front together. With right sides together, lay the front over the back and pin at the shoulders for both pattern pieces. And then sew them in place. Then just press those seam allowances open. Sew the back facing to the front facing next. Effectively, we're trying to create a nice circle all the way around. So with right sides together, just pin the tops of the facing at the shoulder seams together. Don't forget that because of the way we drafted it, we're expecting them to line up at 1.5 centimetres on either side. So pin both sides together. And sew using a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Next, we're just going to press those seam allowances open too. Okay, with right sides facing up, just double check that you've put all of your 3 notches, 1, 2, 3, and likewise on this side as well, that you've got those marked on. They should also be marked on your facing pattern piece. So I just want you to put your facing with right sides together on top of the bodice. And you should be able to line up all of those notches really beautifully. Pin the facing to the bodice with right sides together now. Lining up your notches and your shoulder seams. Excellent. Let's sew around that using our standard seam allowance now. Lovely. Let's snip our corners now, just to reduce any volume there. And then if you want to, you can grade the seam allowance. And finally, I'm just going to snip into the curves of the neckline just to reduce any tension as I turn it right side out. Okay, let's turn this right side facing out, making sure that we've got a nice sharp point at the corner here. In order to just help the facing to stay under, we're just going to iron it in place, making sure that as we're ironing it, the top is slightly rolled under so that we can't see the facing when we actually wear it. Oh yeah, I'm loving the look of that neckline already. Okay, so once you press the facing in, we're then going to flip the whole garment so it is right sides together. And we're just going to sew up the 2 side seams now. Sew them up using your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. And once you've sewn them, just press those seam allowances open. Now you should have your line markings for your buttons. For me, I can sort of just about see the red markings that I did on my bodice front. And I can see them coming through. So I'm just going to use a washable fabric pen just to annotate where those buttons need to go. And they're going to go on this side, which is going to be my left side, because that's the way we usually draft for women, for a women's block. But obviously you can put them whichever side you prefer. I think when I was drafting, I put these 2 ones down here a little bit too low. That's absolutely fine because that's the whole point of pattern drafting, is that you can see where your pattern maybe didn't go so good and you can then pick it up and change it for when you do your final one. So don't worry too much about that. Likewise on the other side, if you can see where your button holes need to go, that's great. And if you can't see where your buttonholes need to be, you can line up your notches of your pattern piece with the 3 notches which are on the bottom. And you can just locate those now. Now every sewing machine has a different way of sewing buttonholes, and some sewing machines will even automatically sew your buttons as well. So go and grab your manual of your sewing machine, have a little read of that, make sure you're confident in how to sew your buttons and your buttonholes, and then let's go off and do that for all those buttons and buttonholes. Now our buttonholes are going to start 2 millimeters away from the buttonhole marking from our pattern piece, 2 millimeters towards the edge of the pattern piece, and then they're actually going to go backwards like this in that direction. Okay, lovely. So we're now going to make the holes for our buttonholes. The easiest way to do that is to grab a pin and just put it through the fabric, so it's through on both sides and it's just at the end of one of the buttonholes. Grab your unpicker and just push it through the other end, and then very carefully, holding the fabric nice and firm, just unpick all the way to the end. Now your pin is actually going to prevent the buttonhole from ripping all the way through the rest of the fabric. If you've got a buttonhole chisel tool, that's also really handy at this stage. Now, some double-breasted tops don't have buttonholes on the far side, because they just kind of put fake buttons there. So that's also an option for you if you don't like sewing loads of buttons. We'll give that an iron in a few minutes once we've sewn the buttonholes on. Okay, let's start sewing those buttons. I've got at the bottom of the thread, I've obviously tied a little knot. I'm going to sew in from the front side, from the right side first, so that knot is hidden on that side. And it doesn't show, it's hidden by the button. Grab some buttons and let's just start sewing them on. Now for the purpose of the toile, I'm just going to sew probably 2 or 3 times through each hole, just so that it's secure enough. So there we have it. Let's go and see what it looks like when it's on. So here we have it. This is the double-breasted button-up front detail that we've pattern drafted together today. This can be quite a formal look, but I really like the neckline that we've added here, and it can create such a fantastic accent to a very simple garment. Imagine if this was a dress and it extended all the way down, and you had some really cool buttons on there that were just really like giving it like a pop of colour. It'd be amazing. So I can't wait to see how you guys choose to use that detail that we've drafted up today in your own beautiful and gorgeous creations. We absolutely love seeing your creations here at Minerva, so please do create an account on our website. It's completely free. You can upload your photos, share your thoughts, tag the products, and make sure that you definitely tag the pattern drafting hashtag so that we can see exactly what you're doing as well. I would absolutely love to see what everyone's creating as a result of this course. So thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva, and I'll see you next week.